Hello, my superstars, and welcome to the online learning unit that I have designed for us, Twisted Tales. Over the next several weeks, we are going to be reading many short stories and some poems, and we'll be watching some short films and clips that all fit underneath the horror genre. And in this presentation, we're going to be learning about some of the elements of the horror genre that we as a class are going to be looking for and discussing at length as we move through the unit. So first, important to note that the elements and characteristics of the horror genre it's countless. There are so many. However, I've narrowed it down to 4 specific and important elements that we are going to be looking for and analyzing as we read and move through the unit. So the 4 that I've decided on are conflict, building suspense, foreshadowing, and plot twists, which are sometimes called story reveals. Okay, let's start with conflict. So in literature, conflict is a literary device characterized by a struggle between 2 opposing forces. We, as we read, need to decide what kind of tension is our main character experiencing. There will be some kind of obstacle, some kind of enemy, or some kind of opposing force. And it's our job to analyze, to determine what type of conflict our main character is experiencing. There are 5. Man versus man. This is when our main character is opposed by another human character. Man versus self. So think, we are our own worst enemies, or we are our harshest critic. Whenever a character is really hard on themselves or angry with themselves, feeling some kind of guilt. Man versus self could also be if a character is experiencing some kind of figment of their imagination, or if they're hallucinating, or if they're in some kind of mental state where they're imagining an opposing force. Man versus society is another type of conflict. Man versus nature and man versus supernatural. We are going to be running into a lot of man versus supernatural as we move through the unit. Suspense building. So suspense building looks different in movies when you're comparing it to literature. In movies, it's really, I think, easier to build suspense because you have that visual aspect. You can do things with the lighting and with shadows to build suspense, as we see here in these images here. Camera angles are also a really important tool that can be used to build suspense in movies. For example, you'll notice up here, these 2 photos are called low angle. It's when a director places the camera below the character, looking up at them, and it creates this sort of sense of power or intimidation. This photo here is an example of a tilted angle, which can build suspense because it creates this really disoriented sort of feel, or kind of like an unstable feel. Obviously, a really powerful tool for movies to build suspense is sound. Sound can be really powerful to build suspense, but so can silence and volume. So I have some clips here we're going to listen to. There we go. So that really kind of that slow building of a really intense sound can obviously be an effective way to build suspense in a movie. It's really creepy sounds can build suspense. In literature, unfortunately, it's a little bit more difficult to build suspense because you don't have that visual aspect. In literature, you have to create the visual aspect in your reader's head by using what we all have talked about at length, descriptive language. Your language can create those suspenseful moments when you're building suspense in literature. So you're going to use descriptive language to paint a picture for your reader of a dark and mysterious setting or dark and mysterious characters. Also, we're going to be looking as we read these texts at different writing styles and choices that authors make to influence things like pace and mood, which can be really effective in building suspense. So, one example of a stylistic choice that a writer can use to build suspense is by writing really long and chaotic sentences. When it's really, really long and you're jumping from point to point without any real solid pauses, it can create this really like chaotic or panicked sort of sense. So I'm going to read this for you. It's from H.P. Lovecraft's short story called Pickman's Model. Its position was a kind of crouch, and as one looked, one felt at any moment it might drop its present prey and seek a juicier morsel. Damn it all, the fiendish subject had a dog face with pointed ears, bloodshot eyes, flat nose, and drooling lips. It had scaly claws and half-hooved feet, and his technique, Eliot, the cursed, the impious, the unnatural technique. As I am a living being, I never elsewhere saw the actual breath of life so fused in a canvas. The monster was there. It glared and gnawed and gnawed and glared, and I knew that only a suspension of nature's laws could ever let a man paint a thing like that without a model, without some glimpse of the netherworld. Okay, so again, of course, there are a few different sentences in this passage that I've just read, but there are very long passages of text where, as opposed to using a period and starting new, there are these dashes here to indicate a moment of like slight pause. And if you read it, the way that it's written, it does sound very panicked, very chaotic. The other end of that spectrum, sometimes authors will build suspense with really short sentences or sentences with excessive commas, which make you pause. It slows things down, and that can be used to convey mystery and anticipation. So from the same short story, Pickman's Model, there's this passage here. He drew a revolver, motioned me to silence, stepped out into the main cellar, and closed the door behind him. It was spooky. So we're going to be looking in the text that we're reading at things like punctuation, things like grammar, and trying to decide if the author is making choices with his writing style or with her writing style to influence things like pace and mood. And we're going to be considering how that might be building suspense. Okay, so the third is foreshadowing. And to help me with this, we're going to watch this real quick clip.
A young woman is preparing for her day. She brushes her hair, sprays on a little perfume, opens her drawer to get her scarf, closes her drawer, and leaves her home. Wait a second. Did you notice something unexpected? Why is a gun in her drawer? Why is it presented in this way when it is not used at this moment? You are given a clue about what will happen later. This is called foreshadowing. Foreshadowing happens when clues in a story hint at future events. What about this situation? Who is the man in the photograph? What might the photograph be foreshadowing?
Okay, so we talked a lot about foreshadowing as we did our novel studies before school closures. Most of us were reading Percy Jackson, and we noticed how there was constant mention of like the very strange patterns in weather. And there were constant situations, very bizarre situations that occurred whenever Percy was in water. And we later realized that all of those patterns were actually clues to what we later found out was this big, huge plot twist that Percy Jackson is, in fact, Poseidon's son. A little bit more relevant to the Twisted Tales unit that we're about to engage in is foreshadowing that can be seen in Stranger Things. So I don't want to ruin it because I'm not sure if you've all seen it, but we know that the characters play Dungeons and Dragons, and that in itself is a huge clue of what's to come later. And then even in a later season, the photos that you see here, this photo here is of the boys playing a video game, and at one point one of the characters is quoted saying, "I'll use my torch to set fire to the chambers, sacrificing ourselves." And this bottom photo here, again, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's never seen it, but all I'm going to say is this photo is proof that this scene in the very beginning of the season was actually foreshadowing what was later to come. So as we're reading through the unit, we are going to be thinking about clues that we notice and elements of foreshadowing that lead into plot twists towards the end. And that brings us to the fourth element of the horror genre that we're going to be looking for as we move through the unit, plot twists or story reveals. In literature, film, television, and even video games, a plot twist is an unsuspected occurrence or turn of events in the story that completely changes the direction or outcome of the plot from the direction it was likely to go. Plot twists are designed to disrupt things in a story that the audience thinks they already know or have figured out. The author achieves this twisting of the plot by providing huge shock or surprise, one that is either completely unexpected or was perhaps foreshadowed through earlier details or events. This is the last of the four elements that we are going to be focusing on as we're moving through the unit, reading the short stories and the poems, and even watching some short clips and films. Conflict, building suspense, foreshadowing, and plot twists. Of course, if you guys have any questions, you know that you can email me at any moment. I'm really looking forward to reconnecting with all of you and engaging in this online instruction with you. I hope that you're excited, and I will talk to you soon.